Hi, I'm Shazad. In the last session, we spoke about the styles in WPF, and we saw like the styles are really great. We can group all the common properties of the controls and give them a name, and then whenever we need to set those properties to any control, we don't need to set all those property individually to all the controls. What we can do is we can simply refer the style to all those controls, and then when the controls are rendered, they will go to that style, pick up all the properties and their corresponding values from the style and set it to the control. We also saw like the styles are quite flexible. uh, Even if a control is referring to a style and a style has 10 or maybe 15 properties mentioned in there, and all of those properties are not valid for that particular style, for that particular control, then the framework will ignore all the properties which are irrelevant and will only set those properties which are relevant for that particular control. We also saw like we can override the properties which are mentioned in the style. And for example, if the style mentioned like the control width is this, but if we want to customize or change the width for a particular control, we still uh, uh, we still should be able to refer that control to that style. But when we say width is equal to this, so it will ignore the width which is mentioned in the style and will set the width which is particularly set within that control. And the other advantages are obviously we can organize our code. The code is more readable. We have one place where we can set all the properties, so the basic of the common properties of the controls, and if any of those common properties is supposed to be changed, we just go to that one place and change the value, and it is changed all over our UI if we are referring all the controls, if all the controls are referring to that style. So we saw some really great advantages of using styles in WPF. No, what we did in the last session was kind of static stuff. So for example, we had this style which is a my control style, and it is setting width, height, foreground, background, border brush and font size. All these properties are kind of static, and they will be there no matter whatever the state of the control is. If the control is selected, if the control is not selected, if the control is focused, if the control is not focused, if mouse moves on the control, if mouse is clicked on the control, these properties are kind of, they will stay same. Now let's think of a scenario when we need to set some properties of the control based on a certain condition, when some trigger happens based on some event or based on a certain value of a certain property. If we want to change the style of a control, if we want to change a property of a control, when a certain property of that control has a certain value, so what can we do that? To do that, or to deal with this kind of situation, we have triggers within the style. So within the trigger we can say, okay, this trigger, if this trigger is applied on this value of the control, and if this property of if this property of a control has this value, then applies these triggers. So within those triggers, obviously we can mention the name of the property that this trigger will be applied to, the value of the property. So when that particular property has that mentioned value, then we can put all these setters. So all the properties that we mention within the setters will be applied when that particular property has that mentioned value. So for example, if I have the search button, we have the search button here. If I want to say when my mouse moves on this search button, say if I want to give an effect, like I want to increase the width or height of the control, or change the font color, then we can write a trigger, because that cannot we cannot do that within this static kind of, using these static kind of properties that we set in this style. So what we will do, we will come up with a different style, and we can give we can say my button mouse over style. Okay, one thing I would like to, we have already seen, like we can base our style on another style. For example, I already have this style which is based on my control style, so this is a basic style. Then this style is derived or is based on this style. Now this the style that I'm going to write, the trigger style I'm going to write, is based on this one. So that means all the properties that are mentioned in the parent style that this style is based on will automatically be applicable. The other thing I would like to mention here is its target type. If I want my style to be applied onto certain type of controls, then I can enforce that as well. For example, I can say the style that I'm writing now is applicable for the type button only. So that means this style can only be applied to buttons and not to text boxes or any other kind of controls. Okay, so now what we have said is this is the name of our style and it is based on this style, and this style is based on this style. So that means when this style, my button mouse over style, is applied, all these properties will be set by default because this style is based on these two styles. Now within this style we want to apply the trigger. So what we will say, style dot triggers. Okay, so that means this style is based on the triggers, and by trigger, as I mentioned earlier, that means there will be an evaluation of a certain property that will specify within the trigger, and if the property value is what we specified here, for example we say is mouse over, so this is a property, and whenever its value is true, then apply this trigger. Okay, so that means within the triggers, obviously within the trigger style dot triggers, we can have more than one trigger, and for each trigger we will say please check this property. If this property is mouse over is evaluated to true, apply this trigger, and when you apply this trigger, then we can use these setters. So we can say when this property is true, so what you do, you increase the width of the control, and it is 50, so make it 55, and then you set another property, okay, height, by default it's 30, and we want to increase it a little bit, we say make it 32, and then we say so setter, we say property for ground and value, if say change it to red or something else. So now what will happen is when the mouse over property is true, these three properties will be applied to the control. Okay, and if we want to apply another trigger, we can apply another trigger here as well. So then when this trigger will be evaluated within this style, so those properties will be applied. So now let's apply this style on our button and see. So this is my button. So that means these static, like this, these background, foreground, width, height, and this bold font should stay there even when I apply this new style, because this new style is based on the existing style. So that means existing properties should stay as it is, and when I run and hover the mouse over to this button, I should see my trigger applied. So you see, when I move the button over here, and you see the difference, because when the mouse is over this button, that trigger is evaluated to true, and when that trigger is evaluated to true, its both height and width is increased and text color is set to red. You see, we can use these kind of dynamic triggers, or we can make our styles more dynamic by using triggers. And triggers, as I said, works on dimension properties, and those properties are evaluated against the values that we mentioned, and if the value that we mentioned is matched, then the trigger or the setters are applied. Now this is the trigger on the button. Now let's write another style which is more related to the text box. Now when we type in a text box, we see this control is getting focused, we can type it in, but what if we want to make it a bit more dynamic? So let's write another style with a trigger which is more related to the text box. So what we do, we say style, and let's give it a name, and that is my text box got focus style. Okay, based on, now this style we don't need to make it bold, so we say this style is based on my control style, which is just setting the basic properties. So based on this static resource, and again we can specify the target type here, and target type we can specify text type to text box. That means this style is applicable to the text boxes only. Now within this style I need to apply the triggers. So I will say style.triggers, and within the style.triggers I will write my trigger node, and within the trigger node I will say which property to evaluate and what value. So we say, so I say is keyboard focused. So property is keyboard focused, and if the value of the property is evaluated to true, this trigger will be applied, and when this trigger will be applied, then we say setter property background. We just want to make it a bit more what we can say is like more, so that it's getting more attention from the user. So what we can do, we can do is we can say when the keyboard is focused, or when this control has got the keyboard focused, what you do, you apply the background and say yellow. So yellow will make it more prominent, and if you want to do something else, so we can do that. If you want to say foreground to red, or maybe green. Okay, so now this style, the name is my text box got focus style, and it's based on my control style. It is applicable to text boxes only, and the trigger is keyboard focus. So when this control will get the keyboard focus, it will change or apply these two properties. So whatever the existing values of the background and foreground are, they will be changed only until the keyboard is focused. Whenever the control has got the focus, these two values will have these values, but when the control will lose the keyboard focus, the default or the previous values to these properties will be applied again. So let's check, let's run it and see. So now our application has two controls which are based on the triggers. One is the mouse over. So when the mouse is over, we apply this trigger to this button. Now on this text box we apply another style based on the trigger, and that is not the mouse over. So you see, when we move the mouse over, trigger is not applied. Trigger will be applied when we will get the focus. So the trigger is not applied, that means there is some error. So let's see what is the error. So mouse over, so my text box dot focus property is keyboard focus to true. Yeah, that should be true. Oh, I think we didn't apply this style. Yes, so we need to apply this style to our text box, and our text box is here. So we apply this style to our text box and run in the application, and then when the keyboard focus is on this control, we should see, yes, see, its background is yellow and foreground is green. And when the control will lose the focus, you see the default or the original values of those properties is there. So whenever the focus is there, it gets. Now you see, now I'm pressing the tab button. So when this control gets the focus, the trigger is applied, and the values, the property values that are mentioned against that trigger is applied. Now when this button gets the trigger, when this button gets the focus, the trigger is not applied, but when I bring the mouse over, the trigger is applied. So you see, because that value, when this button gets the focus, the trigger is not applied, because the trigger is applied against the mouse over. So only when the mouse is over this button, this trigger will apply. And on this text box, the trigger is only on the keyboard focus. So if I want to do the same on the mouse over, then I have to apply the trigger on the mouse over, or maybe on the both. So you see, these triggers are really helpful. They let us or help us make our controls quite dynamic, and we can change certain properties based on certain conditions, certain triggers, or certain events, and they help us, they help our controls to behave quite dynamically. These triggers are really great, and let's see what we discuss in our next session. And by that time, maybe you can practice these triggers and styles, and have a nice time. Hi, this session is related to our last session, which was about the triggers within the WPF styles. WPF styles, we discussed like we can group the control properties and set their values, give them a name, and then can refer that style by that name within the controls. So all the controls which refer to a particular style, they get the values of their settings which are mentioned in the style and set the values. Then this was kind of static settings of the values using the styles. Then we saw like using triggers we can make our controls quite interactive and respond to the user based on certain conditions and certain values. So using triggers, our controls react more dynamically and based on the environment or based on the situation. So we had we put triggers to we made styles with different triggers. Like one style was for a button, so when the mouse goes over the button, we change some of its properties, like the size gets bigger and the foreground color is changed. Similarly, we put another style based on the trigger, and that was like when the text box gets the keyboard focus, its background color is changed so that it becomes more active or becomes more prompted to the user. And we, in these two styles, we put one trigger in each. But now think of situation when we want two or more than two properties that we want to become true or become valid before a trigger is executed. For example, if I want to put two or three properties within one trigger, or say if I want a button which has a focus and then the mouse is over the button, only then I want to change some of its properties. And similarly, if I want a text box that has the keyboard focus plus the user is typing in, some characters being typed in, or the mouse is over, so how can I do that? So for that we have multi triggers, and we can put more than one triggers within that, and they are executed by the AND condition within them. Similarly, there could be another situation when we want to evaluate a trigger based on the contents of a control. And so far we have discussed like a predefined property of a control, the property of the control which is already defined or already exists. But think of an example. We have the energy rating system within our homes in UK. Like we can specify, okay, if the energy rating of a house is 3, I don't know the standard, but let's talk about we define our own standard now. So if the energy rating of a house is 3, we say it's green, like the energy rating is green, like the house is much more efficient in using the energy, it doesn't waste the energy. If the energy rating given to a house is 2, we say, oh, it's somewhere in the middle, it can be improved, there is some wastage of the energy, but not too much wastage of energy, so somewhere in the middle. But if the energy rating given to a house is 1, we say, oh, there is something seriously wrong with this house, the energy rating is 1, that means a lot of energy is being wasted. So maybe the house need to have double glazed or triple glazed windows, and some lighting system need to be improved. Instead of with 100-watt bulbs, we need to introduce energy saver bulbs, and something else need to be done so that energy saving can be done more efficiently. Now think of a form where we get the energy rating of a house in a text box, and based on the value we show the color. If it is 3, I mean the energy rating is the most efficient, we show the text box with the green to say, so the control, our text box is more responsive, like user types in, oh, the energy rating for this house is 3, and immediately control color becomes green, like yes, it's green in environment friendly house. If the energy rating, if the user types in energy rating 2, the background color becomes yellow. And if the energy rating given within the text box is 1, we immediately show the red color, so that the user becomes alert, oh yes, something is wrong, so this house needs to be looked at, the energy rating is not good. So I have set these, I've made these styles, I will just quickly show you. So within our existing application, I just added 2 more controls here. Energy rating, so it's a text box here. We already had this trigger, the style with this trigger, like when mouse is over, we change certain attributes, and similarly over here, when the focus is there, the background color changes to yellow. There was no style on the reset button, so I have added a style which is the multi-trigger style, and that multi-trigger style is when the mouse is over plus the keyboard focus is on this control. So at the moment mouse is over, so the trigger is not applied, and if I know the keyboard focus is on here, so the trigger is not applied. The trigger will only apply when the keyboard focus is on the reset, which it is at the moment, and when the mouse over properties too. So for example, you see Now the keyboard is focused and mouse over is true, so that multi-trigger is applied. I will show you the trigger in a minute. But just to let you know, if you want to apply more than one triggers with the AND condition it, so you need to define the multi-triggers and put all the triggers which you want to evaluate using the AND condition, and then put their setters in there. So those multi-triggers will be applied when all the conditions within those triggers are set to true. For example, in my multi-trigger I set two properties, mouse over and keyboard focus. So at the moment both are true, so the trigger is applied. And this is the trigger which is based on the value which user writes in. So we talk about the energy rating. So if energy rating is 3, it gets green automatically. So now the trigger is evaluated against the contents of this text box. So I have set, like, if the content of the text box is 3, make the background color green to show the user like the house is very efficient in using the energy. If it is 2, set it to yellow, so the user say, oh, it's somewhere in the middle, more energy saving can be done, but at least it's not worst. And if it is 1, we show the red. That means this house has some problem using the energy, it need to be looked at. So now let's have a look at these triggers, how I made these triggers. So this is my button multi-trigger style. So what I have done here, within the style.trigger node I have put the multi-trigger. Okay, so it's not a single trigger that we have done earlier, so it's a multi-trigger, and within a multi-trigger I have set 2 conditions. I can set any number of conditions here, and there will be an AND condition within these. So within these 2 multi-conditions, like is mouse over equals true and is focused equal to true. That means when both of these conditions or when both of these properties have their values as true, then these setters will apply. So within these setters I'm increasing the width and height and changing the background and foreground color, which we have seen when this reset button got the keyboard focus and then the mouse over, we saw these setters being applied. Then on this text box related to energy rating, you can see here it's the style is my text box energy rating data trigger. So that's the data trigger. They're not the normal other triggers. So we have another kind of trigger which are called styled dot triggers, and within that we specify data trigger, and within the data trigger we have to specify the binding. So over here binding is like self source, relative source is self, so it will the binding is based on the same control, and the value comes from the text. So it's the text property of the same control, and if the text property of the same control has a value equals to 3, then apply this setter. So that means within this data trigger, if the text property of control, the same control, now I can apply this setter based on the value of another trigger. In that case, within the binding I can specify any control, any path. So based on the value of any control I can execute this setter. But over here obviously we are typing the value in the same text box, so we specify the same self control and the value is text, and if the value is 3, then the setter is like set the background color to green. If the value is 2, set it to yellow. If the value is 1, then set it to 1, and as you have seen it executing. So my first trigger is multi-trigger, which is on the reset button. So if it has got a focus and mouse over, the trigger is executed, and then if this data trigger is evaluated based on the value that the user types in. If it is 3, it is executed as a background color to green, 2 with yellow, and 1 with red.